Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I know this week has been an energetic whirlwind, so let's talk about it. We're smack dab in the middle of eclipse season. We just had that lunar eclipse on Tuesday, the 17th, and now we have a solar eclipse that's coming up on, I believe, October 3rd. So we're right in the middle of that energy. We just had the fall equinox, and then there's some more interesting stuff that's coming up that I want to cover. So I'm sure you've seen the news stories about the second moon that we're going to be getting on September 29th. Then there's a bizarre 8 billion year old radio signal from the creation of the universe that's currently hitting us. And then there's that supernova that apparently is going to happen any second now. So I want to touch upon all of it. But first, I want to go back to a video that I had posted about 2 or 3 years ago. And it was the first videos that I posted on this channel. And the titles of them were The Cookies Are Crucial and Passing Through the DMZ. And in both or one of those videos, I can't remember, the cards were talking about this random variable that was going to be thrown into the soup. And that random variable was going to be the thing that finally shifts things. And when I say shift, we all have different language, right? Some people are talking about ascension, 5D, waking up, new earth, whatever. Pick your language. We're just going to call it the shift, right? I think that kind of covers all the bases. But this reading that I had done, again, I think it was Passing Through the DMZ. I think particularly it was that reading. And it was basically saying that there was an event on the horizon that is not on anybody's bingo card, right? So when you think about like the apocalypse bingo card, right, there's people that are like, oh, it's going to be the UFOs, it's going to be the blue beam, it's going to be the zombies, it's going to be whatever it's going to be, right? But what the cards were showing was that there was something coming up on the horizon that is not on the bingo card. And the reason why that seemed important or significant is because it's not on anybody's bingo card, nobody is projecting their BS onto it, right? So it's almost like a clean scenario. Because there's no awareness, because there's nothing being projected onto it, it's like it can play out without baggage, I guess. That's the best way to say it. But there's something about that, the randomness or the unexpectedness of the variable that shifts the timeline completely. And it reminds me of that movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And the entire movie was about timeline jumping. And if you've seen it, if you haven't seen it, spoiler, in order for them to timeline jump, they would need to do these very random, unexpected things, right? So it would be like, you have to eat this matchbook or whatever. And because you do that, you jump into the next reality. And the reason why you're able to jump is because it's so ridiculously unpredictable that it basically breaks the algorithm of the matrix, right? Now, in terms of the energy that I'm seeing, whether it's on the street or in my private readings, especially in a lot of the private readings, it seems like a lot of people are finding themselves in an uncomfortable situation right now. And the overwhelming consensus is this idea that either you misinterpreted your intuition, or your intuition led you down the wrong path or something like that. You're currently finding yourself in an uncomfortable situation and you're thinking, coulda, shoulda, woulda, if I could go back, yada, yada. But what the cards keep saying is that your circumstance is not a punishment. You did not make a wrong turn. This is not a mistake. You did not mishear your intuition or anything like that. But that this circumstance where we're currently finding ourselves right now, whatever environment you're in, is basically, it's like these are the perfect conditions for timeline jumping from where you are to where you desire to be, right? And it might sound ridiculous considering wherever you might find yourself, but it has something to do with, it's like this is the perfect alchemical lead to turn into alchemical gold, in addition to all of this bizarre astrology that's happening right now. Because, if Mercury goes retrograde and it's trine Pluto and this, that, the third, we have data for that, right? But when a second moon shows up, we don't have data for that. When a star randomly goes supernova, we don't have data for that. These are random variables that are being thrown into into the soup that are allowing things to happen in completely unexpected ways. And I think the reason why a lot of us have found ourselves in tricky situations that are very, very red wire, blue wire, for lack of a better term, right? Where it's tricky. The reason why we are where we are right now is because this is my own personal language for understanding this, but it's like each of us that are active players in this game doing the work, we are effectively like the IT team, right? The tech team that has come down here to clean this place up and reprogram it in real time. And the things that we're experiencing, the choices that we make in those experiences, literally reprogram the matrix, right? And the programming has everything to do with choice, right? So either choosing to do something, choosing to move towards something, or choosing to reject something. And I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing on the main stage right now, is that collectively we're rejecting a lot of the programming and we're rejecting a lot of the things that are coming. And another epiphany that came through the cards in a couple of the different readings is that it was coming through with the Nine of Cups. And the Nine of Cups usually talks about being proud of your choices or at peace with the choices that you've made, right? But when you're in a Nine of Swords energy, which is kind of the opposite, it's very much so the energy of regret. It's like the best way to flip that is to realize that the fact that you wouldn't do it again, and I'm talking about things that you would, qualify as a mistake, where maybe you were mean to somebody or rude, or you did something that it's like you're not necessarily proud of, and it's like you wouldn't go back and do that again. You would rather, see peace or something like that. That in and of itself transmutes the energy. I wouldn't exactly use the word karma because I think that karma is a misnomer in terms of how it works in this matrix, but the fact that you would energetically do something different is significant, right? And it's basically the energy of like lesson learned. You're good. You've qualified. You understand that, if you could do it again, you would do it differently. You wouldn't be petty. You wouldn't double down on it. That's a beautiful thing. And in the same respect, it's like a lot of us only are where we are because we followed our intuition, right? It's like 98% of the choices that we make are motivated by faith. And the fact that you continued following that in and of itself is a beautiful thing, even when it hurt, right? But the other side of it in terms of intuition and things like that, and I've said this in another reading, but I want to repeat it because it is so important. Our intuition, it's like when we incarnated into this realm, I think that we had like a list of things that we were looking for, right? So the analogy that I use in another video is that it's like I incarnated in here looking for a blue square, right? So that's like what my spidey senses are looking for. I'm looking for the blue square. And in the old realm, there were plenty of blue squares that popped up that were imposters. And that screwed up my intuition because I'm supposed to be looking for the blue square, but it's like something else somehow knew that. I don't know how, but it did. And I think a lot of us have experienced moving towards what we thought was the blue square, only to find out that it was an imposter. And now we're sitting here thinking, well, now I don't know what direction to move in, right? Because that was the only real compass that we had to work with. People are starting to see new blue squares pop up, and it's creating a sense of agita for everybody because they're thinking, is this the same old, or is this something new, right? So it looks like it's something new. At least in terms of my own experiences, it's like, you used to touch the stove and it was hot, and nowadays I've been touching the stove and it's not hot anymore. I don't know why, but things have shifted. And again, there's this new astrology that's being thrown into the mix, these random variables that I think are designed to literally help us jump out of the scenario that we're in right now. And going back to the everything everywhere all at once metaphor, it's like each of those things that allowed them to timeline jump did seem a bit uncomfortable. And I wonder if that was intentional in terms of, the way that they designed the film. Because it does seem like, at least in my own history, if I go through my inventory of manifestations, everything leading up to each big jump that I've made has been uncomfortable. So I don't really know what that's about, but maybe it has to do with, you know, like I said, rejecting certain programming, but then also doubling down and choosing other things, right? And that's very much so what the tower energy is doing right now. So we see how it's encouraging us to let certain things go because they're unsustainable, but it's also encouraging us to double down on things where it's like, it's kind of like the principle of you don't know what you got till it's gone. Well, sometimes it doesn't even need to be gone, right? Sometimes you just have to potentially maybe almost lose it, and then you realize how much you love it, right? And I think that there's a lot of that happening right now as well. So without further ado, let's talk about all of the interesting astrology that's happening right now. So, beyond the eclipses, we have an 8 billion year old radio signal that's hitting Earth for the first time. And of course, my first question is, how do they know that it's 8 billion years old, right? But what's interesting is when you read the articles, that number, 8 billion years, implies that this is a sound from the birth of the universe, right? So you can call it the Big Bang. I'm not saying I believe in the Big Bang, but that's at least what they're implying, right? So it's the original frequency, which is very interesting. And then, of course, they keep using the language of radio signal, which is kind of clickbaity, but it implies communication, right? Of course, when you read the articles, they say, oh, well, it's not really a radio signal, it's a pulsar from X, Y, and Z. But radio signal implies communication, right? We send information across the radio waves. So I think that that's very, very interesting. The other really interesting story is that apparently we're going to be getting a temporary second moon, which is going to arrive on September 29th, and it'll be here until November 25th. All of these articles that I'm seeing on every major news outlet keep referring to this meteor as a second moon. But then when you read the articles, it's not like, another body the size of our moon is showing up. It's completely different, right? So the parameters, the specs of this second moon are as follows. It's 33 feet long. Go figure. It's going to be about 5 times as far from us as the actual moon is. It will not be visible to the naked eye. It's technically an asteroid, and it's just going to do one little loop and then fly back off into space. Now, for context, 33 feet is basically the size of a school bus. There are plenty of satellites in orbit that are much larger than 33 feet. We do not call the International Space Station a second moon. Why are they using that language? I took all of that information and I plugged it into ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to write a story about a second moon arriving in Earth's orbit. Now, I did it twice. So the first time that I did it, the prompt was just second moon. I didn't add any parameters or anything like that, but just write a story about a second moon. And of course, that story was very grandiose and cataclysmic and yada yada. So I went back and I said, write a story about a second moon that is 33 feet, 5 times as far from the actual moon, invisible to the naked eye, technically just an asteroid, yada yada. But I wanted the story to focus on how it might influence life on Earth, right? Because my hypothesis is that ChatGPT seems to be able to comb the fringes of the internet and compile information that's very difficult for us to find, right? But I don't know the limit of ChatGPT, right? It's like, is it reading NASA documents? Is it reading things that are not publicly available? It might be, I have no idea, but I was just curious to see what information it would mine. So the first time that I asked it to write the story about the second moon, it did not name the moon. The second time, when I plugged in the proper parameters that would be in all of these documents, in all of these articles, it named the moon Lilith. Now, I know that that's a loaded term, right? If you've lived on the fringes of the internet for a while, I'm sure you've heard the term Lilith, and you might have some preconceived notions. This is my theory about that term. The Sumerians, who were probably some of the most evil people in history, are the ones who demonized that name. When we look at what they glorified, I have questions about anything that they would demonize, right? Because anything that they glorified was objectively evil, period. Sumerians, Phoenicians, Canaanites, same people. So I don't really want to co-sign on anything that they would say, if you know what I'm saying. But what's also interesting about the term Lilith is that allegedly it comes from basically the pre-Christian creation story. So you take the story of Adam and Eve and you back it up before Eve even came into the picture. So Adam and Lilith were supposed to be equals. Adam was created from the mud by God, so was Lilith. Eve, if you remember, was created from Adam's rib, right? As if to imply that she was some sort of lesser being, which is ridiculous, I know, but we're just working with what they give us, right? So Adam and Lilith were equals. Adam had some sort of narcissistic complex where he wanted Lilith to be submissive to him. She said, no, thank you. And she fled the garden and went and created her own experience. And then Eve shows up later as what I guess you could call the imposter feminine, right? Something like that. So what's interesting to me about ChatGPT naming this second temporary moon Lilith is that the moon is what we associate with the feminine, right? And I've had theories when I've digested that story in the past and wondered, was the story of the creation of Eve talking about some sort of like imposter energy that was created by Adam just to create chaos and yada yada. That's a whole other video for another day. But it definitely implies that Lilith would be the original divine feminine, if you want to call it that. So that is arriving. And just thinking of it within the context of astrology, how do you plug that into your chart? You know what I'm saying? Like, if everything in the sky has some sort of influence over us, including asteroids, right? Because I know at one point I had this crazy astrology software, and there must have been 1,000 different asteroids that have, all different kinds of influences and effects over human behavior and yada, yada, yada. And they're way far away the hell into space, right? So if this one is close enough that we're calling it a moon, I have questions about how it's going to affect us. And according to the story that ChatGPT wrote, it's going to create very strange, lucid dreams and maybe a little bit of insomnia. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. In terms of everything else, like weather and yada yada, it doesn't really affect anything, according to the story that it wrote. But dreams are the big thing that kind of kick up during this temporary second moon. But again, it's interesting again that it called it Lilith, because that implies that it's some sort of original frequency returning. The 8 billion year old radio frequency is the original frequency returning. And according to the science, we're supposed to get that supernova that I've talked about by the end of September. So I mentioned this in the video leading up to July 15th. I think July 15th would be in the title if you want to watch it. But there is a star in the constellation Corona Borealis, go figure, and that star apparently goes supernova once every 80 years. So it's a regular supernova. So raise your hand if you've never heard of a regular supernova, you've never heard of a second moon, you've never heard of any of these things that are happening, right? Random variables being thrown into the soup, right? Right on the bingo card. And here's my other random variable, Luna. And so what's fascinating is that it's going to be in the northern crown, right? So it makes me think of if you think of the crown chakra, right? The idea that there's a chakra above your head, it makes me think that there's another, oh my God, sorry, Luna is pulling my cord, my dear. I'm so sorry. Ay, 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 ay. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties. So the northern crown. So the northern crown makes me think that there's almost like another chakra above the crown chakra, which I've been calling a star chakra. I feel like maybe Cindy from Awakening to Spirit mentioned something about this, but I don't know. I don't want to muddy it up. But the idea of this of the Corona Borealis going supernova makes me think that chakra activates in tandem with that. And the reason why I'm saying something that ridiculous is because I have to wonder, I have to hypothesize whether or not this regular supernova is the same star that the Magi saw in the Christmas story, which let them know that the Christ had been born, right? Because they never elaborate on the astrology. But how would the Magi have known what that new star in the sky corresponded to, right? So, what we know about Zoroastrians and the Magi is that they have at least 20,000 years worth of history to work with, right? So, 20,000 years worth of astrological data. So, if there is a regular supernova that happens every 80 years, they would be well aware of it. And they would know what it corresponded to, which would imply why they, raised the red flag with King Herod and said, "Hey, you're in trouble. You in danger, girl." So what's interesting about that is that obviously, the Christmas story talks about the birth of Christ and yada yada and that very specific thing. But if we're going to take that out of the equation and just apply it to all of this woo-woo stuff, it makes me think about the idea of Christ consciousness coming online, right? Because on the fringes of the internet, we're either talking about Christ consciousness or the 5D activation or the DNA activation or the restoration of the light body or this, that, and the third. It's all the same thing, right? Different language for the same concept. And my question again would be, how would the Magi have known that this corresponded to that? And what's interesting about this particular supernova is that right now, before the star goes supernova, it's barely visible. If you have a telescope, you can probably see it. When it goes supernova, it becomes the brightest star in the sky, which I have no idea what that's going to look like, but apparently it's going to be pretty darn bright. So obviously the Magi would have been able to see it, as well as everybody else on Earth would have been able to see it. The other thing that's very interesting about this particular supernova is the last time it went supernova was 1946, which was right after the end of World War II. World War II was probably the most significant event that changed the timeline, at least within the last 100 years, right? Before that, the last time that it went supernova was 1866. 1866 was the year that the Civil War ended, and it marked the beginning of what they call the Reconstruction period. If you know anything about the Great Reset rabbit hole, about the idea of where did all of this magnificent architecture come from and how did these people with horse and buggies build this magnificent palatial architecture, they attribute all of that to the Reconstruction period, which would have started in 1866. So there's two significant reset events that coincide with this star going supernova. It's interesting too because it marks the end of a significant war, right? So it's like I wouldn't say that we're in anything comparable to World War II or the Civil War right now, but typically this kind of marks the beginning of peacetime, for lack of a better term. So if anything, it's like that seems somewhat positive. I don't know how else to frame it, but that's pretty much what we've got going on this month. So that's supposed to happen by the end of September. Then again, we have another solar eclipse that's happening on October 3rd. The radio frequency is hitting us as we speak. We're going to have that temporary moon again from September 29th through November 25th. So right before Thanksgiving, it's going to ricochet back out into space. And then I saw Cindy from Awakening to Spirit mentioned that she was getting a strong hit on November 1st as that being a significant energetic date when the veil was going to be extra thin and just an event of high strangeness. And I thought that was significant because I can't remember Cindy ever mentioning a specific date, like pay attention to this. So I'm paying attention. And I think that's pretty much it. Is there anything else that I want to cover? No, I think that's it. If you're interested in a reading for yourself, hit me up. We can do a little Zoom, find out what the second moon is doing for you. And other than that, I hope y'all are hanging in there and having a beautiful week. I will see you next time. Bye, y'all.